A warm welcome to the founder and leader of the Cape Party, the Cape Independence Party, the Cape Exit Party, the Cape Asfunubalape South Africa Party, Jack Miller. How are you doing, Jack? Great to have you on the show.
I'm good, Leletu. Thanks for having me.
Yes, that's great. Hey, before we go into the politics and your party's ideology, I'd like to know about you. Who is Jack Miller? Where is Jack Miller from? And what did Jack Miller do before politics, going into politics?
Yeah, I'm a Cape Townian. It's my home. You know, I've lived here my whole life. It's the most beautiful place on earth, and you know, I've been fortunate to be able to travel to many different parts of Africa, many different parts of the world, and you know, I think coming back home, every single time I did, I realized just how special this place is.
Yes.
I was in boarding school in the Eastern Cape, in Grahamstown, and what I noticed, which began, I suppose, my seeds of concern and discomfort
Yes.
with where the country was going, is that the Cape Town that I grew up in as a little child, I noticed that every time I came back on school breaks back to Cape Town,
Yes.
I just noticed more rubbish in the road. You know, I used to be able to walk from friend's house to friend's house late at night.
Yes.
And then I ended up getting mugged on a few separate occasions, and then I didn't even want to get involved in politics. I still don't want to be involved in politics.
Yes.
I'm here out of by force, against my will.
Yes.
There would be no Cape Independence Party if it wasn't for the state of the country and the direction that we're heading. So I actually wanted to get involved in film. I actually am. It's something I still am involved in. But so when I was in matric, I won't mention the name of the companies because perhaps they don't want to be mentioned. But one of the top advertising companies in South Africa came to my school, and they said, "Look, we're interested in interviewing youngsters who want to get involved in the film industry and advertising and marketing, things like that."
Okay.
And so I put my hand up in the school hall, and I went to the front and I put my name in there.
Okay.
And
That was in high school, right?
that was high school. That was matric. Yeah, matric.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was
Yeah.
2002.
2002.
2002 in matric. And I put my name down, and then a week passed, and 2 weeks passed, and I went to the teacher. I said, look, sir, what's happening? When can I have this interview with this advertising company?
Yes.
And the teacher said to me, Jack, I'm sorry to tell this to you, but unfortunately, you're not black enough. They don't want to interview you.
Okay.
I could
At
not
that time.
even get an interview in 2000
Yes.
and
2002.
2002. I could not even get an interview with this advertising company because of my skin color. That was probably that was quite a visceral moment where I realized, wait a second. This political thing is, it's real. It's real. And so, and then I went to UCT and just gradually became clearer and clearer that the Rainbow Nation we were promised in 1994 is not the reality on the ground.
Yes.
And in 2007, I was part of this Facebook group, of people that also believed in Cape independence and decentralization, and so it sprouted out of that. And in 2007, we formed the Cape Independence Party, and in 2008, the IEC approved our registration.
Yes.
And we've been doing this battle now for 17 years.
For 17 years.
17 years.
Yeah. So the party was formerly known as the Cape Party.
Yeah.
What was the real, reason behind forming that organization? I know now you talk about, the racial exclusion that you had, but what fueled it, at that specific time? I really would like to know. And are you probably the only founder of it, or was it a group of people that actually started the organization?
No, there were other founders. Adrian Kay from Grassy Park. He was part of the a colored gentleman from Grassy Park. He was part of the whole sort of Facebook side. I had family members that were also involved who are no longer here anymore. So yeah, it was a group of concerned citizens, business people, taxpayers,
Yes.
and none of us were professional politicians at the time. I don't think any of us really are professional politicians now. We're just
Yes, yes.
normal people, business owners, business, employees, whatever, that are just sick and tired of what's happening in this country. So there's a number of reasons why I started the Cape Independence Party, and yeah, it was the deeply concerning racial direction that the ANC was taking the country in.
Yes.
It was just pure material facts on the ground, as I mentioned before. All of a sudden, the streets I grew up in, instead of being clean, pristine, safe streets, now you're dodging potholes. You're worried someone's going to put a knife in your back if you walk too late at night. Employment opportunities aren't available for you because of your skin color. The rand was starting to collapse. I mean,
Yes.
when I was born, I think the rand was even stronger than the dollar.
With the dollar.
So 1984, I think the rand was like, it was like 70 cents, 70 US cents, or 70 rand cents to $1, something like that. And then in 2007, 2008, we started to see the rand starting to collapse. I mean,
that time the economic crisis was also the global economic crunch.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was happening too. But obviously, the value of your currency is relative to your own economic conditions. So if the whole world is collapsing and your rand is collapsing faster than the world is collapsing, it's not a good position to be in. And as we've seen, I almost found like when we started the Cape Independence Party that we'd have to explain why we wanted Cape Independence because people couldn't see the writing on the wall.
Okay.
I almost feel like we don't need to talk about that so much anymore. We don't need to talk about the economy. We don't need to talk about education. We don't need to talk about crime. We don't need to talk about the potholes in the road. We don't need to talk about corruption. I mean, we can and we should. If the penny hasn't dropped for people yet, that we're heading towards a Zimbabwe type situation, then I don't know when the penny's going to drop. We're concerned that we're almost past the point of no return. And we're seeing parties like the EFF become stronger and stronger. And what they're pushing is something incredibly radical, incredibly racial. And the ANC does nothing that. We don't even hear the ANC talking about a rainbow nation anymore. So these things that we were promised 30 years ago have not only not proven to be true, but we're getting the exact opposite.
How has, from forming the party in 2007, right, how has the traction been on the electoral side? Are you finding that you're getting more votes? How has that been?
Yeah, we definitely are. I mean, every single election we improve, we make strides forward. It's been slower than we've wanted. I can say it's perhaps been a bit of a hyperbolic chart in that 2007, 2008, 2009. So it would have been the 2000. We had a by-election in 2008.
Yes.
We contested the 2009 elections. We contested the 2011 elections. Each election we've improved, so the trajectory is up.
Okay.
But I think that the penny hadn't quite dropped for people living in the Cape, that this was not going to be a rainbow nation. And the current ANC had no intention of making it a rainbow nation.
Okay.
And what we're seeing is the policies that they're introducing are steering us further and further away from a rainbow nation and more towards a Julius Malema, EFF driven, race-based, fascist, centralized, totalitarian type of state.
If you're looking, for example, when you say the rainbow nation, probably you mean by it was just a publicity stunt. But the active citizens, don't you think it's also a responsibility with the active citizen to engage with each other, to treat each other with respect? So would you just blame the African National Congress, or you'd also look at the active citizens and the social economic situation of South Africa?
you know, the fish rots from the head, and you have
Yeah.
to look at the language of the ANC. Pretty much when Nelson Mandela stepped down, we almost immediately began to hear the tempo begin to change. And Mbeki was the first to start to introduce black economic empowerment and these various policies which were geared at quota system discriminating one race group for the benefit of another. And this is not what we were promised in 1994. And this is what began to happen. And then the BEE became triple B, triple E, and
Yeah.
it became more and more clear that. And then the Employment Equity Act emerged, where it wasn't just in certain state-influenced, state enterprises that you'd have quotas. It was clear that now every single aspect of society would have to be structured on racial lines, from sport to music to anything. It doesn't matter what you're doing, schools. The ANC government began to get its tentacles into every single aspect of day-to-day life. And we're at a point now where you can't open up a newspaper, you can't send your kids to school, you can't report a crime in a police station, you can't be a sports fan without having race shoved down your throat. So there's definitely a sequence of events here. And it's very clear that the community can only respond with what's being put in front of them. And I think you absolutely, certainly my experience has been that the non-black community, whites, colors, Indians, and Asians, largely embraced multiracialism and multiculturalism and a rainbow nation.
Yes.
And the factions that were pushing against it did not come from other racial groups. What we've seen was the ANC shift away from a rainbow nation, the emergence of parties like the EFF, which have no time and place for a rainbow nation and are calling for the complete opposite, calling for the genocide of white people, the genocide of Boers. And so I think one has to say that no, the fish rots on the head, and the head of the country made it very clear that the rainbow nation was no longer the agenda. Racial separations and discrimination and prejudice was the new agenda.
So, in terms of like the economic system of black economic empowerment, I mean, it's obviously not a new thing in South Africa, because obviously even in 1910, on the settlement, more concessions were given to the Afrikaners to empower them, because they just had come out of a war, the Anglo-Boer War. They were in concentration camps. So there was a deliberate attempt to empower and also to erase Afrikaner poverty. So don't you think that there should have been, right? There should be economic policies that redress the past?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because something we've tried very hard to express to those who perhaps don't see things from our perspective is that our issue is actually not just with the ANC. Our issue is with the ANC. Our issue is with the apartheid government. Our issue began with the British Empire. And we don't believe that the Union of South Africa should have even been created. That was a terrible mistake. And so everything that has happened in South Africa is not even the name of a country. It's a name that was given to us by the British Empire after the genocide that they inflicted on the Boers. So we don't believe that the Boer genocide should have happened. We don't believe that the British should have taken independent countries, independent states, and forced them into an artificial union in 1910. We don't believe that union should have continued into 1948, in which the Northern Nats took over and then imposed the apartheid system. And we don't believe that the centralized colonial construct should have existed into 1994, where you then had the ANC taking over those exact same levers of power and using it to their benefit. So whether we've been under British rule or Northern Afrikaans Natural
Yes.
or ANC Rule,
Yeah.
every single one of these
All
groups
these
are all
nationalism.
pulling, guns out and telling people how things should be against the will of the majority. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, as you can see, like in the country, a lot of our racial tension also goes with open wounds from the past. As you mentioned, you had the four states, two belonging to the British and the two belonging to the Afrikaner. But obviously, even before we got to 1910, I mean, there's a huge amount of conflict, slavery, wars, colonization, and so on. So, don't you think that aren't you worried that this will invoke racial tension in the country and also end up as a civil war?
No, not at all. In fact, we're
Because
not the one invoking anything. As I said in the beginning of our interview, I would not be here. I would not be sitting here. There would be no Cape Independence Party
yes,
if we truly got a rainbow nation. We are a product of ANC policy. The Cape Independence Party is a product of EFF policy and ANC policy. If they stopped what they were doing and they were sincere about giving every single ethnic group in this country a fair place under the sun, a fair opportunity, the Cape Independence Party wouldn't have had a reason to exist. But because they have driven the country to where we are now, I mean, what other options do we have?
so in terms of the borderline, you're pushing for secession, right? As if we could look at the Cape Colony, it took the Western Cape, it took the Eastern Cape, and also the Northern Cape as well. So the British started annexing these areas that had resources, Griqualand and so on, and started an empire and destabilized any leadership form or any organizations, I mean, African kingdoms and so on. Are you pushing a secession for just the Western Cape, or you want the Western Cape and the Northern Cape part?
Well, I mean, just to touch on the history of South Africa, you go a bit further. If you look at the homelands in South Africa, there was not one single homeland in the Western Cape. There was not one single homeland in the current Northern Cape. There was not one single homeland going up to pretty much the Fish River. So if you look at this area where you have a homogenous culture, a homogenous history, where the majority language is Afrikaans, and it's an interesting culture because it's a mixture of different communities and different ethnicities from different backgrounds over almost a 400-year period. And so that's how the Afrikaans language was created. It's a mixture of Dutch with Malay and Khoi influence. It's the emergence of all these different cultures together. So, and this is why the majority of people, whatever skin color they happen to be in the Cape, Afrikaans is by far the majority language. So if you look at this territory that we believe would be the most likely territory which would vote in favor of independence. I just want to say that we're not imposing anything on anyone. The people are going to have to vote for this. We're not saying this is what's going to happen. We believe, based on the history of Southern Africa and particularly the Cape, that the Western Cape would be in favor of Cape independence and the Northern Cape would be in favor of Cape independence. And certainly parts of the Free State, parts of the Eastern Cape would be in favor of Cape independence. Whereas other parts of the country have shown us very clearly that they're very happy with the ANC. They're very happy with the EFF. So, election after election for 30 years, we can see very clearly the lines of which territories in South Africa love ANC rule, love the EFF, and we can see very clearly which territories don't like the national government, don't like ANC rule or the EFF. So that territory would be the Western Cape and the Northern Cape primarily.
It's interesting that you mentioned the apartheid government Bantustan Act, because what they did, they created homogenous states. I mean, the Xhosas, we had the Ciskei and the Transkei, the Sothos, Qwaqwa, Venda, and so on. But all of these homelands, they even extended it to Namibia. they had Bantu land, they had Bushman land, and so on. Herero land, dividing. But we all know that the main reason behind the Bantustan system was to decrease the population of black people in their own land, right? And be able to sort of, pool the cheap labor from those underdeveloped Bantustans. So don't you think this can really invoke such? Because it's not a new thing. It was done. And obviously, as you could look at the poverty and the underdevelopment, that it was a deliberate thing, and they created these homogenous states where black people will be there, firstly decreasing the population of black people, and also pulling up cheap labor for the mining industry.
Well,
So,
let me just clear up a few, I think, facts there. First of all, let me start off with the first point. The first
Yes.
point is that I can't defend apartheid policy. It's not for me to defend
Yeah.
apartheid policy. You might want to interview someone else who has a vested interest in returning apartheid policy. For us, we have almost a 400-year history here in the Cape, which includes the entire Western Cape and Northern Cape, where there was not one single Bantustan. We don't support what the apartheid government did. We believe the only reason the apartheid government could have gotten away with that is because the first error, the first mistake, was the British Empire forced us into this false union. So the apartheid government never should have had the power to do the things that it did. And similarly, the ANC should not have the power now to do the things that it's doing. And the British Empire are the cause of the problem because they're the ones that put it into effect. But if you're going to talk about homogenous states and apartheid creating homogenous homelands, it started hundreds of years before that. I mean, you look at the Imfakane, and Shaka Zulu single-handedly made KwaZulu-Natal a homogenous state under the edge of at the point of a spear. I mean, Shaka Zulu single-handedly made Lesotho a predominantly Sotho as the Sothos fled into the mountains to escape Shaka Zulu. And similarly, the causes were driven down outside of KwaZulu-Natal by Shaka Zulu. So there's a long history of homogenous communities going on long before the apartheid government. So, but again, that's just to add some historical context to what you've said there. So I don't agree with that, but again, it's not for me to agree or disagree with those aspects of history, be it Shaka Zulu or be it the apartheid government, that our concern has to be focused right here in the Cape. We've got to look after the interests of the Cape. And the last 30 years, in fact, the last 130 years, the Cape has been subject to the will of forces and centralized governance, which have not been to our benefit. And we think it's time that this colonial mistake comes to an end.
If you could look at your following and your traction, who is the Cape Independence Party talking to? Your following, where is it coming from?
The Cape Independence Party is talking to people that want to sleep in their beds at night with the windows open and the doors unlatched. We're speaking to people that want to send their kids to a school that knows that if their kids work hard and study hard, that when they get to matric, they can enter a job, enter the workforce in which they won't be judged by their skin color. We're speaking to people that are sick and tired of a political system which prejudices against people on their skin color, a political system which uses the levers of state to line and fill their own pockets to the detriment of all people, of all skin colors. And we find that the people of the Cape, we're also, I mean, I mustn't exclude the other provinces here. We know that there are many other provinces and many other communities that actually want independence for their own community. So KwaZulu-Natal has a strong movement for that. The previous king even threatened the ANC national government with KwaZulu-Natal secession. We personally have spoken to the Abatembu royal family about 10 years ago. Yes, exactly. and yeah, yeah, and they were talking about Abatembu independence too. We know the Sothos in Lesotho, they didn't like the portion of land that they got given, so
they want more. They want more.
Lesotho wants more of the Free State, and there's Tswanas in the north of the country that are like, hey, my cousin living in Botswana, he drives a better car than me. His kids go to a better school than me, and they got a good standard of living there because Botswana's got a higher standard of living than the Tswanas living in South Africa. So there are many different groups around South Africa that are just not happy with the ANC, not happy with South Africa as a centralized system, and that would like to govern themselves. And so here in the Cape, we, as I said before, for 30 years we voted against the national government. Yet for 30 years, we're living underneath the same party's control. So it's just not working for the Cape.
I see the DA is also pushing for provincial autonomy on some other aspects, the rails and so on. Have you been talking to them or lobbying them?
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
Well, the problem is,
because they say they're totally against what you guys are vouching for.
Yeah, the ANC is to South Africa what the DA is to the Western Cape.
Okay.
So we have many problems with the DA. Certainly we will enter into a coalition with them in order to force a referendum. Why? Because they are the largest party in the Western Cape. So there can be no agreements and referendums without us having a coalition.
Without their support.
So we have to have a coalition with them.
Okay.
But we've called the DA ANC light, and this is and I'm sure the ANC is probably irritated with them too. I mean, we don't like it for different reasons.
Yes.
But the DA has adopted pretty much all the ANC's policies. They just tone it back a little bit. So instead of expropriation without compensation, they go, no, well, we want land reform. Instead of the Employment Equity Act, which is representative of South Africa, where, I mean, as you know, I forget the MP's name now.
Yes.
But he was saying basically there's too many whites and colors living in the Western Cape, and we need to bring in blacks from other provinces, and we must move these whites and colors out to make it 80% black. Jimmy Money, exactly. So, I mean, that's like, that is insane. That's just insane that an ANC representative could be saying something like that. So the DA won't go that far, but they'll go, oh, no, but we need to have quota systems and this and that.
Yeah.
So we've seen the DA as ANC light.
Okay.
And we believe that unfortunately they're lying, and they've lied on many occasions. They in 2019 was when they promised us, and these are Cape Independence Party policies. We want to control our own police force. We want to control our own railway. We want to control our own housing programs. We want to control our own energy. We want to control our own water supply. We want to control all sorts of things. I mean, it's.
So you want full autonomy?
Well, we will take
on the basic services that affect local service delivery and so on.
Exactly. So if you got the ANC controlling these services, and the one province that doesn't vote ANC, those services which are under the capacity of a national government, of course they're going to throttle us on those things. So we're getting hit from both sides here. We're getting hit from an ANC that seems to openly despise and disregard the people of the Western Cape, and then you've got a DA that thinks, okay, well, we've got the Western Cape vote in the bag. We can treat these people as cows to milk, and we can show the rest of the country, hey, what a great province we are. And we've got these voters in the bag, and we're going to use the Western Cape voters and the revenue we collect from Western Cape voters to prove to the Eastern Cape, to prove to KwaZulu-Natal, to prove to Gauteng that the DA must be in power. So we've got them implementing ANC policies to try and win over ANC voters. So that's how you've got the
Oh,
DA
okay, I
being
see.
ANC light to try and get ANC voters in the other provinces. And here we are as
So
the
their
cannon fodder.
interest is appealing to the majority. So that's
Exactly.
why they would be ANC light.
By copying the ANC. Yeah.
So let's go quickly to the economy. The total GDP of the Western Cape is about 634 billion, right? And obviously that is the financial sector, manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. And that's all consumed nationally and also internationally as well. If you look at, you spoke about the division of tax act. How do you divide that, the GDP of the Western Cape on how does it get divided nationally by Treasury? I would ask. Yeah.
Okay, so
It's
basically,
because I saw a video you explaining. I
yes.
thought I would ask you about that.
Sure.
Yeah,
So the Western
division.
Cape is
Yeah.
14% of national GDP.
Okay.
So if you calculate 14% of revenue that's collected across the whole country that goes into national treasury, 14% makes up approximately 260 billion rand. If you then look at the Division of Revenue Act, the allocation that the Western Cape gets back on our provincial allocation and our local allocation comes to around a total of 60 billion.
Okay.
So if you do the calculations, basically we're getting back 1/4 of what we put in.
Okay. But obviously the service and the products are consumed nationwide. That's the thing. If I've got a factory here in Cape Town and I sell in Johannesburg and so on, so don't you think that if you're pushing for more autonomy, I mean you still have consumers around the country.
Oh, sure. Well, you've got consumers around the world. There's automobile plants
Yeah.
in KwaZulu-Natal, I think Eastern Cape as well. BMWs, Volkswagens. These get shipped all around the world.
And
So
Utsnik.
looking at it from a consumer perspective is not the right way to look at it. Taxes are collected in order for a government to deliver services, and the Western Cape is heavily abused and heavily detrimented in the amount of revenue that we put in compared to the revenue that we collect. If you look at our contribution to what we receive back, it's far worse than every single other province. So, it's and to add on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, the reason our situation is so much worse is, so for example, housing is a national capacity.
Yes.
So the revenue that of the 260 billion that we put in, that goes to the ANC-controlled National Treasury, a big chunk of that will go towards housing. Now,
nationally.
Well, it's controlled nationally, but also houses are being built in the Western Cape. But houses are how those houses are built and who those houses go to is determined by ANC policy. So now you've got Western Cape taxpayers paying for houses to be built in the Western Cape based upon policies dictated to us by the
national
ANC.
government.
So, it's we get hit from various different angles. And obviously the DA doesn't want to oppose any of these things because, like I said before, they're trying to win ANC voters. So it's a terrible situation, just basically based on the numbers, how much we're putting in, how much we're getting back. And then that which we do get back on conditional grants, those conditional grants are based upon the conditions set to us by the ANC.
And you think that, I mean, but to reverse that, you have to go to the ballot.
100% right.
This is democracy.
100%
So
right.
if you hear everyone here in the Western Cape, they would say, the Western Cape is the best run province in the country and so on. But there's massive inequalities in the Western Cape. For you to get better services in the Western Cape, you need to have money. You need to have a good income. But if you look at the other side, the crime rates, the unemployment, the massive poverty, infrastructure backlogs and all of that. So it's like two worlds. How will the Cape Independence Party solve that, the inequality gap?
Well, I mean, you set a very high bar for us to try and solve, and this is why we want Cape Independence, because it's very difficult to solve it under the current political system. So we've got 2 seats currently in the city of Cape Town.
Okay.
And, many people say to us like, oh, like, why don't you push Cape independence more in the city of Cape Town? Why this and that? And it's like,
Yes.
the very moment we stepped into the Cape Town City Council,
Okay.
the first thing that I did was put forward a proposal to decentralize powers from the sub-councils down to the ward level. So
Down to the ward
there's
level.
currently 24 sub-councils.
Okay.
The Cape Independence Party proposed that there should be 116 sub-councils, something like that. Because sub-councils have got far more
Better reach, I guess.
capacity and power and resources than a simple ward committee does. So ward council. So we almost beat the DA on this proposal. We literally almost beat them, and it went to the public participation, and unfortunately, and we saw the votes coming in, and we were literally overtaking the DA, about to overtake the DA, and then they said, no, look, public participation has come to an end.
Yes.
The DA's won the most support in this, and then they put forward a policy where they actually dropped the sub-councils. I think it's from 24 down to 22 or something like that, so they could actually consolidate power.
Yes.
Because if they'd kept it at 24, there were going to be 2 sub-councils, which would have been hung.
Okay.
Which meant it would not have been controlled by either the DA or the ANC. So the DA actually aligned with the ANC to have the sub-councils that more centralized instead of
Yes.
more decentralized. So just to go back to what I was saying is that the Cape Independence Party, we can only fight as hard as we can fight based with the political tools that we have in front of us. We've done the best we can, and Councillor Carl Bowden and Alderman Corin Brainard on a daily basis
Yes.
are representing communities on the ground. For example, we've had a number of successful cases and objections with the city of Cape Town in which
Okay.
the city has taken trading rights away from small to medium enterprises, small little community shops on seafronts, on the ocean front and things like that, shut down, taken away their licenses, taken away their livelihood.
Yes.
For completely arbitrary reasons, and we believe actually political reasons too. But and we fought them on these issues, and we've won. And so we've managed to get those licenses given back to people, and
to the entrepreneurs.
so there's a lot of things that we are doing on the local level, but on the local level, we can't. And with 2 seats, we don't have enough political power to say, listen, DA, you
Yes.
promised us a provincial police force
Yeah.
in 2019.
What's happening?
It's now 2024.
Yeah.
It's more than 5 years later, and you've done nothing. So we can say that, but the problem is, we get shut down in council, and they say, look, this is not a local issue. That issue, you need to take it up in the Western Cape Parliament. Independence is not a local issue. You need to take it up on the Western Cape Parliament or the National Parliament.
Yes.
So that is to answer your question factually with where we are right now, the political power we do have, what we
Yes.
are doing with that political power, the successes that we are making, the inroads we are making. But you're right. If we do want to bring about the types of radical changes and decentralization
Yes.
that we fought for 17 years
Yes.
as a preliminary step before even independence, just at least more of a federal decentralized system.
Federal system,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's what we are doing. We're pushing for those types of solutions to a lot of the centralized stuff that we're getting from the ANC and the EFF. But we're unfortunately limited to the powers that we do have. But we're hoping that in this provincial election and national election, that we can start to make inroads at those levels of government.
Yes.
And then we will be able to push issues like independence more fervently and hold the DA more to account. We hold the DA to account on local issues, but we need to hold the DA to account on provincial and national issues. And in fact, the province is the most important because Alan Winde, the Premier, is the person who has actually the capacity to call referendums. And a lot of these problems can be solved with referendums, which the DA is refusing to call.
In terms of, you spoke about the resources, right? And obviously, I'd like to ask you about party funding as well. Because I saw Rob Hersoff talking about how they need to put all the resources in Cape Independence Party if the ANC goes in coalition with the EFF. How has it been raising funds for the Cape Independence Party, and is Rob Hersov funding you guys?
At this point, Rob Hersov isn't funding us, no,
Okay.
and he hasn't, but he's certainly a big proponent of Cape Independence, and we know that he's a big supporter of many of the things that that we've been doing and other good organizations have been doing.
Yes.
But what we found is that it's largely a grassroots thing. Most of our funding literally comes from people on the ground. It's normal people
So you've
who
got
are
subscribers that
50 rand a month,
50 rand a
100
month.
rand a month, 200 rand a month, things like that.
Yes.
And we're incredibly grateful for that. And we have approached. I mean, like I said, we've been around for 17 years, and we've approached some significant business leaders.
Yes.
Albeit a number of years ago, and at that point they weren't willing to support it at that time. At that time, but yeah,
but now it's gained momentum.
It's
now
gained momentum, and money is
the
mother's milk of politics, and you can't do anything. I mean, posters cost money, T-shirts cost money, campaigns cost a lot of money. So it's we're hoping that in the coming weeks and months, we will see some of those people who've shown good interest in decentralization, in federalism, and ultimately a referendum on independence that will come to the table and will fund us and support us with greater capacity. Because at the end of the day, to get our message out there, we're going to need funding, we're going to need greater capacity, and yeah, hopefully we will make some breakthroughs there.
What's your opinion on private funding? Because if like a private funder funds you, obviously they're going to want some conditions. So what is your opinion on that? Do you think political parties should be funded by the government and not private funders? Because we're seeing this, that private entrepreneurs, they would fund a specific party, but obviously they would like to catch it on the other side by controlling the party as well. So what do you think about that? Do you think that political parties should just be funded by Treasury, South African taxpayers, and then they will be held in account by just South African taxpayers?
I wish that was the case.
I remember starting up a business and I had investors, and when you're not making the revenues, you know how that relationship is like.
Exactly.
It's another one.
If I answer this question sincerely from the bottom of my heart, once again, I'm having to defend a system that I don't believe in.
Yeah.
In an independent Cape, I don't even believe we should have political parties.
Is it?
I think we should ban political parties. I think people should be able to vote for individuals. They should be able to vote for specific
You're
policy.
pushing for direct democracy.
Direct democracy.
Constituencies.
Absolutely. The whole political party system is inherently corrupt.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, how do you get around that? So you get one big donor that comes in with a big check, but they want a certain agenda to be pushed.
Exactly.
Then that party is no longer working for the goals of its voters. That party is working for an agenda of potentially one or a handful of private donors. So that's problematic. The other thing you presented was, okay, well then government funds political parties. Okay, well, I mean, where do you want to count how many ways that can go wrong?
Yeah.
Obviously then the only parties that
nationalize it,
that do what the government wants them to do are the ones that get the funding, and then all of a sudden laws get passed that say, oh, that party doesn't get funding because they did this wrong, No, so I think the best thing you can do is get as much government interference out of the way and bring government as close to communities as possible, close to the grassroots as possible. And that's where I do believe direct democracy is hands down the best political system that you can have. It just cuts out all of the centralized not just rubbish, but
Yeah.
it's dangerous stuff. It's dangerous.
Because currently we vote for parties, and the parties can, they'll defend themselves and they'll elect someone, and we're not in charge of that.
Yeah.
So I think the direct constituency one,
Yeah, and if we are to have political parties in the Independent Cape, then those political parties need to have more checks and balances that
Yes.
keep them account. So,
Okay.
for example, let's assume we have a referendum on Cape independence in 5 years' time, and the DA is the majority party.
Yeah.
We can't have a copy and paste of the South African system that we have now. There's a reason it hasn't worked.
It hasn't worked
From 1910 until now.
until now.
So if we're going to make the Cape independent, why have a cookie cutter
Yes.
political structure that's failed for 120 years now and replicate that in an independent Cape? So the DA, as I said earlier, the ANC, the DA is to the Western Cape what the ANC is to South Africa. They are unaccountable. They've had a unassailable majority here in the Western Cape for 2 decades now.
Yeah.
And we've got countless examples of communities that have voted DA, that are majority DA, that get completely disregarded by the DA, and there's no recourse. There's no ability to
because they're
hold
the majority.
because they're the majority and they do whatever they want. And as I said earlier, they use the Western Cape
Yeah.
as the cow to be milked to support their campaigns in the rest of the country. Yeah.
So you're hoping they get below 50%.
It's the key.
It's the key.
It's the key.
So that they can get into a coalition.
It's the key. That's what everyone in the Western Cape.
It fuels impunity. Majority, if you've got, they can do anything they like.
They can do whatever they want. They're a dictatorship here in the Western Cape. They've been a dictatorship for 2 decades.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing. We used to be the only party that stood for Cape independence.
Yeah.
And obviously in the last 3 to 5 years,
Yes.
particularly the last 3 years, we've seen that number expand, which obviously we're very pleased about. But obviously we hope that there'd be more sort of cohesion amongst some of these groups, which perhaps is a long discussion. But
Yes.
but every single political organization that wants a referendum on Cape independence, or even a referendum on more decentralization, is going to have to get the DA underneath 50%. If the DA does not get underneath 50%, we're going to get more ANC light.
So with the I see there's quite a whole lot of coalitions being formed. You've got the multi-party charter, which was the Moonshot Pact, and you also have this other one that's also brewing, a more leftist coalition that's going to be coming out of the MK and other political parties that left the ANC. Why aren't you part of any coalition? Because I thought you would be part of the Moonshot Pact, as they call it.
Yeah.
They were meeting yesterday, I think, in Durban. They're voting before we voting.
I've got very good relationships with a number of people in the Moonshot Pact.
Yes.
We work, some of these people we work very closely with in the city of Cape Town.
Okay.
We've got a great relationship with Neil de Beer. I personally think he's a fantastic guy.
He's a great guy. He was also here. We get along well.
He's a legend. So there's a number of people that we're in regular, we got good working relationships with.
Yes.
And certainly the Moonshot Pact is something that we absolutely would throw our hat in the ring, and we'd certainly lend our support to something that could steer us in a different direction to where the country's going. Obviously, we're not a one-tune piano. So obviously Cape independence and a referendum on Cape independence is our ultimate goal. But we've also got to be realistic at certain points. If we had 51% of the vote, no problem. That's what we would do. But if we are pushing to hold the balance of power, with the DA, we need to see how much below the 50% mark can we get the DA.
Yes.
You know, and then how much leverage do we have in that scenario? And so if we can push for more decentralization, which we've done with our 2 seats in the city of Cape Town.
Yeah.
If we can push for more decentralization on the provincial level, then that is something we'll push for. So if we were to be involved in the Moonshot Pact, that is something we would absolutely push for more decentralization. But, you know, as we've spoken about, we think that's almost like, you know, it's putting a plaster on the Titanic.
On a broken arm.
It's putting lipstick on the pig. You know, it's you can only do it helps, but yeah, we've got bigger problems.
I see the Freedom Front Plus has also supported what you stand for. Aren't you worried that they might hijack your cause?
Well, yeah, you know, this is something that voters are going to have to discern for themselves.
Yes.
We obviously do have our concerns. I mean, first of all, I want to say yes. We welcome coalition partners, and we believe that the Freedom Front will be a coalition partner.
Yes.
Can we know that 100%? No, we can only know that when the time comes. You know, the Freedom Front's been in power for 30 years. They've had seats of power in the national government. They've had seats of power in the Western Cape provincial government, and you know, voters can see their track record.
Yes.
You know, they didn't mention anything about Cape independence up until, you know, quite recently, but we're obviously grateful that they've also thrown their hat in the ring, and we hope that voters will hold them to account that they are sincere on Cape independence. I think voters know that for 17 years, the Cape Independence Party has stuck to its guns on this. You know, our principles are unbending. And so if voters want a party that is going to push for Cape independence, then they can be guaranteed of that with the Cape Independence Party. You know, with the Freedom Front, I mean, one concern that we had, there was the terrorism bill that was pushed through a year ago, and you know, Peter Groenewald of the Freedom Front was on the platform there, and this is an incredibly scary bill, the terrorism bill, and one of the proposals there was to remove the right to self-determination
in the Constitution,
as being protected. It was actually protected in the previous terrorism bill, Terrorism Act, and one of our supporters actually went on there and said to the Freedom Front, why are you not opposing the removal of Section 235 from this terrorism bill? And Groenewald said, no, it's fine, we've discussed it.
Yes.
So, you know, obviously we're not in national government, so we weren't there to fight it, but obviously the Freedom Front was. And it turned out that this terrorism bill got passed without a single objection to Section 235 being removed. And Section 235 was brought in, you know, by the Freedom Front. So, you know, those things concern us. But at the end of the day, obviously, we hope that the Freedom Front will tack towards more of a Cape independence direction. And we would certainly be happy to work together with them. We get on very well with, you know, a number of their councillors and representatives and supporters.
Yeah.
So yeah, we hope that they are sincere in what they're saying.
Okay, great. I want to talk just shortly about small businesses. Small businesses are facing a lot of challenges: the electricity crisis, cash flow, you know, funding opportunities that are there. How do you think you can solve that problem for small businesses so that they can scale their businesses and in turn create jobs? Yeah. Especially here in the Western Cape, there's quite a whole lot of small businesses that have closed shop.
Absolutely, and the lockdowns were one of the worst things, you know, to exacerbate that.
Yeah,
and you know, that's something which we opposed from the very beginning. We
lockdowns.
We opposed the lockdowns. We opposed forced vaccination mandates. We opposed.
I didn't know.
We opposed all of this. We opposed all of this, and the DA pushed all of this.
Yeah.
You know, what we were proposing was freedom of choice.
Yeah.
We've stuck true to our guns from the beginning. We don't just believe it should be freedom of choice when it comes to provinces determining their own political and economic will. We believe
Yeah.
it's freedom of choice for your own human body, you
Yeah,
know.
it's your own- yeah, exactly.
So, you know, we supported people that wanted to get vaccinated. We supported people that didn't want to
didn't
get
want to get
vaccinated. What scared us, and we supported people that wanted to lock down and stay at home.
I stay at home.
But if you didn't, and you felt, you know, I mean, if you look at the now that 2-3 years has passed and we have
Yeah.
all of the information available, you can see there were certain age groups that there was no reason to lock down. There was no reason to put masks on little children in schools. That, you know, for 2 years they couldn't see their teachers' faces, and so we were opposed to all of that. And no, the DA pushed all of that. That's another, you know, concern. We hope that in an independent
pushed it.
Cape, we wouldn't have a government like the DA that doesn't believe in freedom of their own voters and citizens and communities to make their own informed decisions on things like this.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to small businesses, you know, the DA has also failed in that regard. Obviously, you know, they've done a better job than the ANC, but you know, we've got coloured communities here in the Cape that have been going back to housing, for example, and this ties in with education as well. First of all, some of them don't even have roofs over there. They're living in Wendy houses.
Yeah, shacks.
Those communities, those families that do have houses are still paying a lease to the Western Cape government, the DA, to live in these houses. And they've been living here for, you know, for decades on decades and decades. At a certain point, they need to own the title deeds of that property. So to kind of answer your question, we don't believe that a government should create citizens that are there waiting for a welfare check and a handout. But what a government can do in these instances is empower communities to take greater responsibility themselves.
Yes. So you're opposed to welfare and grants and...
Yeah, as much as possible, absolutely, you know. And this is, I think, going to be a perfect example to express at what point the state can assist and at what point the state needs to allow communities, give communities a fishing rod, you know.
More investment
than
handouts.
More investments than handout, absolutely, 100%. And so these communities, which are still paying a lease to the DA-controlled government, and have paid the value of those properties 10 times over, they don't own the title deeds. So now, how can this family get a loan from the bank if they don't have assets?
Exactly.
But if they've got the title deeds to this roof over their head, now all of a sudden, they want to start a small little business, you know, a little spaza shop or whatever it might be. You need the capital to buy the foods and whatever and employ the staff. Now, if you've got title deeds to your home, now you've got some collateral and some leverage. Then you can go to the banks. Then you can get some funding, and then it's a self-produced an endeavor, and that's a true entrepreneur. So this is where I think certainly the Cape Independence Party would want to empower communities more through projects like this. We also have a big problem with the education system, which is once again, it's also a spoon-fed type of system.
And you don't think it's speaking to economic demand, our education system?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the best way to have an education system which speaks to economic demand is, this is another thing that we would want greater control over. And I think all provinces would probably want this. It's not just a Western Cape issue. I know on social media, you see all sorts of communities not happy with the government education system. And so even if it's an informal settlement with the community coming together, putting 100 Rand from the uncle, 100 Rand from the cousin, this and that, to send the kids
Stockfells
to a private school where the education is given by members of the community who have the capacity to teach certain skills, that is a much better education.
That are required in the community.
Exactly. Much better education system than the ANC dictating these textbooks which are so outdated and riddled with just inflaming racial animosity. It's just, and this is the same, this is the textbook that Mugabe used. He used this textbook to basically say, listen, how do we justify expropriation without compensation? We create a racial boogeyman, and then if the education system is constantly filtering in this level of animosity, of course, children are going to grow up with this belief that, okay, we're not the same, and we don't like you for these sort of reasons. You know, everyone needs to study history. And it needs to be studied in its entirety, not with one microscope. History has a lot of blemishes on it. There's a lot of atrocities through it. And it needs to be understood in its totality, from the beginning of time through to now. And you will find every single tribe, every single community, every single religious group has done something in the last 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years that some other religion, that some other community is going to go, well, you know, you did this and that. And so, yes, we accept that. That is history. But to go back to, let's stop looking at the rearview mirror. Let's look forward. Let's look to the future. How can we build a great country? And education is critical and is pivotal to that. And having ownership of your own assets so you can get funding to start a small business, like we spoke about now, is critical to that type of development. That's how you get people out of the gangs, off of drugs, starting businesses. You know, then you're not gonna be throwing stones at your neighbor because they're a different skin color to you. You're not gonna be joining one of the Cape Flats gangs because it's easier to make money selling drugs than it is to be a business owner. As soon as you change those things, you see that we'll see gangsterism disappear. I think we'll see crime significantly reduced. And one of the things you can improve the education system is by making sure that when our kids get to 18 years of age, they are ready for the workforce and they enter ready to go. And there's something called the apprenticeship system, which used to be widespread throughout the Cape. So from about, what is it? You know, you can start whatever age, but you know, let's say high school. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, you bring in people that are skilled in whatever it might be, and from standard 6, what's it, grade 8 now, you know, going onwards, these kids can say, okay, fine, I'm going to study maths, I'm going to study English, I'm going to study geography and biology, but I'm going to take another subject which is going to be carpentry. I'm going to take another subject which is going to be accounting. I'm going to take another, you know,
IT or something.
Whatever it might be. And then you bring in people that are actually in the IT industry, in the carpentry industry, in the whatever industry it might be, in the fishing industry.
Yes.
You know, if they want to be a fisherman, you know, bring in skills of people that we actually need in this country. And that's how when these kids get to 18, they've had 5 years of workmanship with an artisan in that specific field.
They've got a practical
and they've got the skills. Now you got kids that are in matric that are full of racial hatred and they can't do multiplication and division or you know, the simplest of things.
Last but not least, Jack, it's been interesting, but what is your vision for the country? Just to close it off. What's your vision for this country? How are you going to get this?
Well, we're 30 years into a one regime. You know, it's, and also people become wedded to empires, but all empires come and all empires go. And as I stated in the beginning, we believe that the Union of South Africa was a mistake. We believe that the Zulus in KwaZulu-Natal that want to govern themselves are on the right path, and I think they would do a better job. They will live a higher standard of living. They will live better lives than they currently do under the ANC government. I believe that the Abu Tembu royal family and the Eastern Cape...
Aswell Barnes. He's my king. Aswell Barnes.
we'll have will live more fulfilled lives, will have a better standard of living, will get a better education because of all these things we spoke about.
Yeah.
If you decentralize that down to the provinces at the very least. And so centralization did not work from 1910 to 1948. So that was largely British controlled. So the British ruled this fake union for 38 years. The Afrikaner Nats then took over in 1948 and then lost power in 1994. So they ruled for 48 years.
48 years.
The ANC took over in 1994 to today, and they've now ruled for 30 years. So you can see that, especially when you have artificial unions, like the European Union, for example.
Yeah.
The European Union
You think that's also artificial?
It's going to fall apart. It's absolutely going to fall apart at some point. You can already see different factions that are not happy with all sorts of different policies that the EU is pushing, because the people of Germany have got different ambitions and goals than the people of Holland and the people of Britain and the people of Spain and the people of Italy and the people of Greece.
And you can see that through the war as well, the Russian-Ukraine war.
Exactly. Of course. There's a huge split in Europe as to how to handle the war in Ukraine and how to handle all sorts of issues. And similarly so, the provinces in South Africa have got different ambitions and different goals. And so... And this has been the case from 1910 up until now. So, as we said, the problem is not the ANC. The problem is the system the ANC controls. The problem was not the Nats. The problem was the system the Nats controlled. And the problem was the system that the British Empire imposed on us. And so we believe that artificial systems like that create such strong tensions inside a country are inevitably destined to fail.
It's a ticking time bomb.
It's a ticking time bomb. So... for me to answer your question, what do I envision for South Africa? The ball is in the ANC's court. The ball is in the EFF's court. The ball is in any party which forms a majority when we know it's going to be a coalition. So any parties that form the majority coalition on the national level, the ball is in their court to determine if Cape independence happens within 5 years and KwaZulu-Natal independence happens within 5 years or 2 years, or whether...
So you're calling for a total dissolvement of the country?
Well, prior to 1910, like I said, the British forced this on us. So we're calling for an end to what they created, and I'm Shaka Zulu would probably agree with me as well if we went back 200 years. So I think people need to have they need to be proud of their communities. They need to respect their values, respect their systems, their cultural values, and the community needs to reflect that. And regardless of who's in power, whether it was the Nats or the British or the ANC, people on the ground are not going to be happy with it. So unless, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi in 1994, the late great, he's fantastic. His policies, his goals for what South Africa was to look like would have been a far more tenable solution of decentralization down to the provinces, a federal system.
It was sad though, because people died. That's my worry about this. Even if you look at in Nigeria, Biafra, 3 million people died. Even the KZN with Mangosuthu Buthelezi, I mean, that was a tough one.
It absolutely was.
Look at the Namibia, when South Africa wanted to annex Namibia, the border war, it took years, it took a lot of lives. And that's why I'm worried that this might end, inevitably as just a bitter civil war.
Don't overlook external influences either.
But you don't have military background, so I'm okay. If you were a general, then I'll.
No,
Look at, I mean, even if you look at Ukraine, what's happening? I mean, they've annexed eastern Ukraine, and I mean that's not just a vote. I mean, they took it through arms. So it's yeah.
Well, I mean, look, Crimea was a vote, but
Crimea,
and there's a long history there as well. There's a long history there as well.
And Crimea belonged to Russia. Yeah, that's what
exactly. Crimea belonged to Russia prior to that. And this is the thing. The problem is people only look at political situations and history through the lens of the newspapers of today without understanding history, which sometimes goes back centuries.
Yeah.
And it gives one a very warped perspective of what's actually happening on the ground today.
Yes.
And why these things are happening. So I'm very hopeful that the situation can resolve itself. You know, if you look at Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan, the terrible conflicts that you had between the North and the South when the country was a unitary state, and yes, you had conflict leading up to, and you know you still have conflicts, but the actual political process of determining communities determining self-determination, like in 1994, yes, you had spark zones and areas where things flared up, but you know that was largely about people pushing for a centralized system and who was going to get control over those levers of power.
Yes.
And that again is the problem. So with Mkhonto we Sizwe and the Inkatha, it was the real danger there was about who was going to control those levers of power. And unfortunately, what we saw there is we had one centralized political structure handing over to another centralized political structure. And if we're going to dive into the history of those individual conflicts, that goes back. That goes back even to Shaka Zulu. So, you know, there were tribal conflicts going back long before even negotiations about what a new South Africa would look like. So that's a complex discussion. But if we just talk about what type of political construct you want to see in the world, or what is the best solution for everyone, individual communities across a wide spectrum of people that live in Southern Africa, what Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi was proposing back then would have been a far more tenable solution in which provinces would have had much more control over their own policies and the way that they govern themselves, which I think would have managed to navigate and avoid a lot of the issues that we're seeing in South Africa today. So to answer your question about what do I see for the future of South Africa, if the country moves towards a more federal type solution, then we're going to see a lot of concerns of Zulu people, Western Cape people, Abatembu, Tswanas, Sutus. A lot of concerns, I think, would be calmed. But if we move in the other direction, where we get more of EFF, ANC centralized type direction, then it's only going to accelerate the problems that we've witnessed over the last 30 years. And then I think we will see, a political system that's going to be much more fragile and much more difficult to hold together.
Jack Miller, thanks a lot.
Thank you
very much. It's been
Thank you,
great.
Sir.